Let's talk about atomization is a capitalist's best friend. So everyone knows the saying, right? A diamond is a woman's best friend. Well, I don't know how true that is, but what I will say is that atomization is a capitalist's best friend. That sounds a little confusing, right? So what's that mean? So atomization is the process by which people are separated from each other. Now, I don't necessarily mean this in the sense that it's been enforced on us in the pandemic, right, where we have to socially isolate and make sure that we are keeping our distance from individual for our own and their safety. And by the way, if you haven't gotten vaccinated, make sure that you're still following regular guidelines, masks, social distancing, number of people that can be in any given space, and things like that. Also, get your vaccine. It's totally free if you're in the US. You should get it. It will protect you from being hospitalized, even if you do get sick from COVID. So you should just get it. There are tons of doses available. There are lots of appointments available, regardless of where you are in the country. Okay, sorry. Back to atomization. So think about it this way. Oftentimes, even outside of the pandemic, you might feel that your connection to your coworkers isn't exactly all there. Sure, you might work on a team and you might have a supervisor and they may have a team, but think about how much work you're actually doing with them. Okay, so you argue, maybe you do a lot of work with your particular team, but maybe your team is atomized from the rest of the company. What I'm trying to say is, the more that you work with either within very small groups or by yourself, the less likely you are to be discussing the way that you work with large portions of the company. You might get a sense of where I'm going with this. Once you are not concerned with the way that other people are working or the way that other teams are working, you're less likely to, feel empathy about what they are doing or how they're doing it. This, of course, these feelings of empathy and solidarity, as they were, are the key steps in forming a union. Now, of course, many capitalists will tell you that they don't need a union. Their shop doesn't need a union because management and the workers have an amicable relationship. But when you think about it, that's not always true. Whether it's, whether the individual managers have good relationships with their individual workers is one thing. But I'm not talking about individual managers, individual workers. I'm talking about, generally speaking, workers and generally speaking, management. So if you work in a place where there are lots of people who do the exact same thing as you and make the exact same wage as you or similar things like that, it might seem that you are not atomized, right? You have lots of people that you work with on the same level. You all kind of interact with management in the same way. There's some level of solidarity there. But even for people like grocery store workers, oftentimes you're in your own aisle or you're stocking things on your own. There's not a lot of kind of team stuff going on there. You have your set of duties and you do them more or less independently of anybody else. This stops you from having conversations about things like unionization. Amazon is another great example of this, where although people are doing the exact same thing and they're working actually in an atmosphere where conversation should be natural. They're all in a large warehouse, they're spending lots of time working, doing the exact same thing. They all interact with management in the same way, which is to say badly. But because of the way that Amazon organized its warehouses, individuals being required to use the bathroom for very limited amounts of time, then being tracked by devices that, even if you slow down a tiny bit, forbid you from spending time and doing other things, right? Because you can be punished for any of these slowdowns. So even in areas where atomization doesn't seem like it would be natural, it still occurs. And the reason for this is to prevent you from forming a union. Or even if you don't love unions, think about it this way. If you can't spend the time to talk to other people or you're not in the same space as them, you don't really feel connected to them. So if they're suddenly fired or replaced, sure, you might miss them as a person a little bit, but the likelihood that you were very well connected to them or that you knew them well or understood who they were as a worker is pretty low because of the way that these systems are organized. Now, I know I've talked about kind of blue-collar shops, but what about in the white-collar world? Well, in the white-collar world, there's a little bit of a different set of scenarios, but it's the same basic thing. Oftentimes you're working, and this is very true in the information economy, where you are spending lots of time working individually or in small teams on small projects. You're not spending a lot of time interacting or interfacing with other people in the business. And although in normal times you could still go to the office and have conversations with people, there's oftentimes a pressure for you to not take many breaks, or for you taking long breaks and getting to know your coworkers and things, to just, hey, if you're done early, just go home, right? That also is a form of atomization, that encouragement, because it stops you from understanding from an empathy point of view your fellow workers. All this leads to the same goal. Don't form a union. That's what the capitalists want anyway. But even further than that, let's think about it from a pandemic perspective. We are all working from home, except for those who are not able to. So I know I've just addressed the people who are not working from home, Let me address the people who are working from home for a second. So think about it. You're working from home. You don't get to see people. You don't interface with people in person on a regular basis. You don't, unless you're regularly scheduling these little Zoom or Teams or Skype or whatever calls with people for social purposes. Most of us are just working our hours and going home. And by the way, this is perfect for a capitalist who does not want you to form a union. There is almost no way in these little societies for you to discuss things that are not related to work. And meetings, more and more, are categorized as unnecessary or unproductive. And if you have a meeting, have an agenda, make it short. There's no time for you to essentially learn more about your fellow workers and what they're going through and other things like that, right? The reaction, instead of what can we talk about that will help us build solidarity, is, oh, well, I don't want to keep you. You should go and figure out whatever it is that you need to take care of, or, oh, I'll let you go take care of your family situation, as opposed to saying, oh, I didn't realize that you were going through this. Is there any way I can help? We're taught that the best way to go through this, any struggle that we're having, is just to let the individual handle it on their own. This is another form of atomization. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about concerning white-collar work, specifically related to the pandemic, is what about return to office stuff, right? So oftentimes you're not making the decision about whether you go back or not, or if you are making the decision, it's a throttled process. There's only so many people back allowed in the office at a time. There's only so many people, allowed to go back to certain offices or certain locations, or only so many people are allowed to work so many days from work at a time. And what this does essentially is it stops the same group of people from being in the same room all the time, which leads to you not really having the opportunity to get that break room talk, to chat about things that are more personal than just your work. So whether it's intentional or not, these practices continue to isolate workers from each other and from the spaces where they could communally organize, whether that's break rooms or Zoom calls or team meetings. Now, of course, there's another category of workers who are completely and totally atomized, to the point where forming a union seems almost impossible. And actually, on this side, there's a little bit of good news. So I'm sure you've heard of the gig economy at this point. It's huge. Tons of people participate in it, for better or for worse. And although the practices behind the gig economy aren't always great, there do seem to be lots of people who are interested in just picking up an app and working when they want, which sounds great. And for some people, it might be great. Personally, I think the gig economy is mostly a scam to atomize workers and maximize profits for the capitalists who own them and the capitalists who are essentially funding these projects. Uber is a great example. But say you're a worker and you enjoy the gig work that you do. Okay, fine. I don't want to take that away from you necessarily. But if you do that work, you should be fairly compensated. You should have perks. You should have benefits. There should be other things that come to that job. And by the way, not only fairly compensated, but the compensation you make should be enough to live on and then some. The purpose of working is not to survive, it's to thrive. So if you were unsatisfied with your work as a gig worker, who would you talk to? Do you know other people who are gig workers with you? Do they work in the same town or same location as you? How would you organize a strike? Could you organize a union? Be impossible, right? Partially because you just don't know who is a fellow gig worker and what their scenarios are like. Oftentimes, gig workers are working more than one working more than one gig in order to get by. So someone who drives for Uber may also drive for Lyft. Someone who works at Caviar may also be an Uber driver in their spare time. This lack of knowledge and lack of clarity is an additional atomization tool of the capitalist class, which effectively stops you from having any good way of organizing. But I did say there was good news here. So what was I talking about? So recently, there has been some movement among Uber and Lyft drivers to organize online in other spaces, social media and the like. And they have actually called a strike among multiple cities. I don't remember all the details of it, so please feel free to look it up. But again, for all those who are not striking, don't cross the picket line, find another way to get around. Public transport is great. But for those who are striking, solidarity to you. You have overcome an incredible obstacle, atomization of the workplace. You literally don't work with anyone else. You literally don't work with teams. Your interaction with management is incredibly personalized, but at the same time, it's impersonal. Only you are going to management, but management just sees you as a number. So you are fighting against the greatest odds, but they've been able to organize a strike, one that may actually have real consequences for the people who manage Uber and Lyft, which would be incredible. It would show that regardless of your industry, it is possible for you to really get to a point where you can overcome the levels of atomization, that the barriers to union creation and solidarity creation that have been put in front of you. So at the end of the day, I guess the point of this segment is when you're working, regardless of what your job is, whether you work in a grocery store or a factory or an IT job or whether you're working a gig or whatever, think about your fellow workers. Think about what ways you can help them that don't involve them taking care of things on their own. Offer your support where you can. Offer to do things for them where you can. These small acts of what most people would just call kindness are really part of building solidarity. And the more solidarity you build, the more solidarity you will feel in return, because you will start to create a culture where workers care about each other. And the greatest of these cultures is the labor union. Whether you organize officially or unofficially or what have you, as long as you're finding a way to make it so that your organization, whatever it looks like, is able to fight back against management in a way that is beneficial for you and your fellow workers, that's all that matters. You can call it whatever you want. The principle is the same. You, the worker who creates the value for the company, regardless of what company it is, should be the ones that makes the decisions on important things like your pay, your benefits, your severance, if that is applicable, your hours, things like that. There's a large strike going on at the Frito-Lay factory, right? They've been striking for a week and change now. There's a huge coal miners strike going on. It's in its 4th month now. You probably haven't heard a ton about these because they're not really going to get televised that much. But the message that you should get from this segment and from all the alternative media who are covering strikes and labor actions and labor organization all around the country and indeed around the world is that the barriers that the capitalist class puts in front of us to stop us from feeling empathy and solidarity with our fellow workers are just that, barriers. And any barrier can be surmounted, especially when we take the time to get to know the people who we work with and to understand from a serious perspective, empathy. Not just the empathy of, I want to help you, I'll let you go do your thing on your own, but the empathy of cooperation, of collaboration, the empathy of, hey, it looks like you're struggling. What can I do to help you? What can we do to help you? Build communities, and those communities in the workspace build unions. And these will allow you to tell management that you're not going to go back to an office when you feel unsafe. You're not going to be required to do this thing or that thing. You are not going to work for a starvation wage. You are not going to work on your weekend. We workers have the power to force the capitalist class to give us our due, to make it so that we have an enjoyable workspace. And even if we don't enjoy our work, that we have enough time away from work that we can recover before we go do something else. Or we have the freedom to get another job or to stop working. All of these fights require workers, the people who create value for society, not just for individual companies, but for society as a whole, to think more about their struggles as group struggles. The people who run society, the capitalist class, they want us to think about our struggles as being our own. They want us to think about poverty as being personal failures. They want to atomize us socially, politically, and in our workspaces as much as possible. Because every opportunity that we take to create solidarity in whatever situation that we happen to be in is one more opportunity where we can push back on the idea that everything is individualized, our successes and our failures. Because the truth is, we have to work together to gain the things that we want. Because if not, management will just get rid of you. Because depending on what your industry you're in, you might just be a number. You might be incredibly replaceable. And because there's always people looking for jobs, you don't know how safe you are unless you take the time to form a union, whether it's a labor union or some other type of community. We can fight atomization and we can win. We just have to work at it.